This is Flick.
This is Rudy.
And this week we have lost a great one, John Prine. We will be paying tribute to a great songwriter who could not only pay off a couplet as well or better than anyone, but could also make you bawl your eyes out. And we will be paying tribute with lists of covers, great covers of John Prine songs.
And I think, everybody should be getting into everybody should go to his catalog for themselves. You should find your way through there. We're going to help you navigate the covers. There are many, many, many John Prine covers, and obviously the source material is up to it. But I think we're going to set you in the right direction this week and get you onto some really, really good shit. You can see the full breadth of artists who were inspired by his life and by his work.
It's episode 29 of the Left of the Dial podcast, coming up right after this.
All right, here's one you may well know, you may not know it, and if you don't know it, I really don't know where you've been.
You forgot? Forgot the magnetism of Robin Zander or the charisma of Rick Nielsen?
That's kid stuff.
It's just come up to 5:35 a.m. Kommen Sie bitte und listen to Kraftwerk.
I don't know, man. I kind of like Van Halen.
Well, yeah, Plum, you do. And you know why you do? Because corporate America is shoving something down your throat and making you believe it because that's what they want you to believe. I mean...
Okay, buddy. I was just trying to cheer us up, so go ahead. Put on some old sad bastard music, see if I care.
That was Big Yellow Taxi by Joni Mitchell, a song in which Joni complains that they paved Paradise to put up a parking lot. A measure which actually would have alleviated traffic congestion on the outskirts of Paradise, something which Joni singularly fails to point out, perhaps because it doesn't quite fit in with her blinkered view of the world. Nevertheless, nice song.
How about the tunes? I want you to want me. The dream police. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Your mama's alright. Your daddy's alright.
I get by because the people make a special effort to shop here. Mostly young men who spend all their time looking for deleted Smith singles and original, not re-released underline Frank Zappa albums.
Yes. I mean, look. You can play an E pentatonic scale at 100 miles an hour till somebody's ears burn off. You can learn that, right? But finding the tangents within the framework, therein lies the artistry, man.
God made your ears. You didn't make them. You gonna argue with God's ears? If it sound good and it feel good, then it's musical. So play it like I say play it. From the top.
That was Sweating Lunatic Iggy Pop, part of our Tuesday night punk pack, which is climaxing at midnight with Madness. This is Norfolk Nights with Alan Partridge, and we're in the middle of Super Talk. Super Talk!
So we're having a hard year so far, I think. I think the COVID stuff on its own is bad enough. The economic stuff is bad enough. The election politics is bad enough. But the music industry lost one of its most beloved artists. And we talked about him on our last show a little bit, John Prine. I threw in his cover of I Just Called to Say I Love You on our 80s playlist. And it's fairly recent. I think he recorded that in like 2018 or 2019. And I really enjoy that cover, and I threw it on the list sort of just to acknowledge that he was really struggling with the coronavirus and that he had been in intensive care and really had had a rough go. I'd read that he was doing okay, and then all of a sudden he's gone. He passes away. And so I think we spending some more time with John Prine makes sense in that context. And you can see from the reaction to his death on the internet that he was very, very loved. So it's a big loss for people who clearly are big music lovers, you know?
Yeah, this is tough. It really has been a hard year. And doing the show, it would, it's one of those things where It's been really tough, and every week we seem to have to be eulogizing somebody week after week, and certainly it's an honor to pay tribute to somebody who you love their work and everything like that, but you don't want to have those opportunities on such a regular basis. So John Prine passed away this past week at age 73. He had conquered cancer in recent years, and I guess personally, like we did talk about him last week. At that time, I was hopeful, that he was going to come through this, but as you mentioned earlier this week, he passed away at age 73 in Nashville. He's a tremendous songwriter, and somebody that comes from vaguely, an area, he comes from remotely the same area as you, and an area that, Chicago, Illinois, that's a big part of both of our lives.
Yeah.
And came up through Chicago. He grew up in Maywood, Illinois. He had his first working musician job in Old Town, a neighborhood in Chicago. That you want to talk about an interesting time to have been in Chicago, and
Do you know that Stephen Colbert went to the School of Folk Music around the same time?
Not around the same time.
Oh, I thought they was like 70s. Wasn't he there in like the late 70s?
No, Stephen Colbert was in Chicago in the 90s.
Oh yeah, he's way too young. I don't watch him. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, though, so the bar, which was called the Fifth Peg in Old Town, that was the first place where John Prine had a working job as a musician, and the story goes, that he went there on a night, it was like amateur night and everything, and he was talking, saying this sucks or something to that effect, and one of his friends, said, well, you get up there and do it, and he was in a state where he was like, well, okay, I guess I will, and he tells the story that he got up there and did I think he did Sam Stone and Hello in There, and I'm forgetting what else, and everybody was quiet, and he said, well, he thought that meant that everybody was just turned off by what he had done, but then they offered him a job, and he had a regular gig there. This bar was across the street from the Second City, where at that time you could have gone to see a Second City show, saw John Belushi and Bill Murray on stage, then gone across the street to the Fifth Peg, saw John Prine on stage, and you might have seen Roger Ebert in the audience. Roger Ebert was the first person to ever write a review of John Prine, and played a big part in the early part of his career.
Yeah, Old Town Chicago was a lot of fun back then. I don't know if you ever went, but like Bazaar was one of my, like, when I think of like good times when I was a kid, going into Chicago and hanging out, going to the Bazaar in Old Town was just fantastic. It was I don't know, Chicago still has that same energy about it. Even Old Town's a little gentrified, but not all the way. It still got a little bit of that feel to it, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Old Town was certainly a place where I spent a lot of time, as Second City is still located there, and I spent a lot of time at Second City. Pretty much every day of my life for a couple of years anyway. So I spent a lot of time in that area. So the story goes from there that Chris Christopherson was really interested in Steve Goodman, and really interested in him helping Steve Goodman get a record deal. And Steve Goodman told Christopherson, well, I'm fine, but you got to go see John Prine. You got to see my buddy John Prine, and got him in a cab to go over and see him. And the next thing you know, Christopherson's telling the both of them to go to New York, and they go and they get record deals with Atlantic Records. And in 1971, John Prine's debut album on Atlantic Records, self-titled debut. We talked last week about Bill Withers, who unfortunately, is one of the people that we lost in such a short amount of time. But talking about Bill Withers' debut album, which I think is just fantastic, and John Prine's debut album is also just one of the all-time, I think, debuts. Like Hello in there, Sam Stone, Paradise, Far From Me, Angel from Montgomery, Quiet Man. I mean, those are all just fantastic. Just like like songs that were staples in his sets for his entire career on that first album. And then aside from that, you have A Legal Smile and Spanish Pipe Dream and Pretty Good. That's just a absolutely amazing debut.
Yeah. Again, I always think I mention this all the time. Like I work with people who are much, much younger than me. And especially when I had worked in New York, you meet a lot of people who are very music centric. The generation sort of below us, I think, found him during the when he put out In Spite of Ourselves. The one that's all duets. I think the whole album is duets, and it's a lot of covers, but I think he wrote the song In Spite of Ourselves. Like he had that's really one of the tragedies here, is that I wouldn't say his career was on and off, but he did keep getting discovered by new generations, and he almost always had new music or a new reason to be coming through town. And it is amazing that, while you're right, his debut album, in terms of if you really want to point at songwriter in the 70s, which is a bit of a cliche, but who really delivered the goods, he absolutely did. But unlike a Harry Chapin or some of these other folks that were really classic 70s singer-songwriter types, he didn't really stay on the same shit the entire time. He did, and again, moving from Chicago to Nashville, I think it's reflected in his sound to some degree too, but he didn't just sit there milking that first album his whole career. He did give the generations afterward reason to pick up his records and give him a shot. I don't think I had heard it Iris Dement before I bought In Spite of Ourselves, and I ended up really liking her. That's Emmylou Harris is on that record, and I think that album, while it's not as important as his first one, it did, I think, turn on a new generation of fans and got Emmylou Harris into their ears and got Iris Dement into their ears. So while I think we should talk about just the sheer volume of covers that exist for John Prine is it's a lot. But it is interesting that there's, while that first album is heavily represented in the covers, people have been finding stuff in his career pretty much as long as he was around to cover. And a lot of it, I mean, the COVID is making it so that everybody's recording acoustic covers in front of their webcams and stuff. And I think that steers the music in a certain direction in terms of arrangement. But he really didn't just stay on one thing. He produced a pretty wide variety of music. And I think that people are dipping into his career and they're finding stuff from all eras to go with. Not that the covers of the recent stuff are as good, but he really did he didn't just sit there trying to do the same thing over and over. He did evolve.
Yeah, well, I mean, the country, if you're alluding to the, more of a country influence, I mean, that was always there. That was basically, where his roots were, because his parents came from Kentucky, and his musical upbringing as a kid was his dad, trying to pick up the Grand Ole Opry on the radio in
right. Well, he was born in Kentucky. I know he went to the same high school as Dennis Franz, and not to sidebar here too much, but for some reason, Dennis Franz to me has always had like one of the most annoying Chicago accents of all time. Yet when he gets on NYPD Blue, they act like it's a New York accent. Like you can't mistake those two things. John Prine didn't really have that. Come to think of it, he didn't have the dem dat and dough overbite air. Like he was, I think he grew up in Maywood, but you're right, he did have.
Well, he was
had
born,
other.
He was born in Maywood.
He was born in Maywood.
His parents were from Kentucky, but he was born in Maywood.
He did not have the. He didn't have the lilt. I know. I can't remember hearing him doing the Chicago dem dat dough. But
maybe it's passed down. Maybe it's passed down to Franz from his parents.
I'm going to look to see if they were of the same age. If they could, it's possible that Dennis Franz and John Prine. Dennis Franz is 75 years old from Maywood, Illinois. They had to be classmates.
Well, 73 and 75. So not classmates, but.
All right, but they would have walked the halls of mighty Proviso East High School there. I think it's at First Avenue and Lake Street, I think. Beautiful Maywood, Illinois. Can't beat it. But yeah, anyway, neither here nor there. But I would have loved to, because you were mentioning like you go to Old Town and you could see this incredible like succession of important people. You could have gone to an intramural football game at Proviso East in 1975, I think, and probably seen Dennis Franz and John Prine. All right, sorry, went down a rabbit hole there. Didn't mean to do it.
Yeah, exactly. No.
Sorry,
Franz, but you might be overplaying his legacy a little bit.
All right. You're right.
All right, but yeah, John Prine, just a fantastic songwriter. A master of the couplet, and also gifted with a great capacity for empathy. Very very good at playing roles. He wasn't. Just always just seeing the world through his own eyes. He was taking on other eyes to see the world with.
Yeah, he was really good at covers. Again, I think that you and I think love covers and talking about them. The sheer volume of covers done of his music, and by just literally like a who's who. Almost every band that we end up talking a ton of times about bands we really like because they're so good at doing covers. I think almost everybody we've lauded for doing covers at some point has a John Prine cover in their repertoire. So he was good at it, and lots of people who were great at covers really loved his music.
Yeah, a lot of great songwriters. Like I think he. It's a big cliche to say the songwriter's songwriter or the musician's musician or that, but really there probably isn't a more fitting term for somebody like this than the songwriter's songwriter. I think he really, because what he was able to do, I think, is what as a songwriter somebody would set the bar for. I don't know if it was Steve Goodman's line or somebody else, but like when he was doing his thing in Old Town, somebody said something to the effect of he writes songs that make us want to break his fingers. And I mean, that's the thing. It's he could write songs in the way that, as a songwriter, I think people would say, well, that's what I have to do for myself. That's really what it's all about. I mean, not just some, like he like I said, he could do wonders with the couplet, but he also had an innate ability to say things in a certain way that would really bring your emotions out, like.
He was a writer though. Like he really was. He had a very literary bent. He was heavy on character and character development. Like he really, you're right on the couplet. His ability to do turn of phrase is, I think, the tip of the spear for him. However, it was always done in the service, I think, of adding nuance to the characters and in a way that the characters are just as memorable in a lot of ways. I really think I don't know that I don't know enough about his biography to know if he was like a frustrated writer or anything like that. But it wouldn't surprise me if they don't find some poetry or something of his, because he really was. He did have an incredible like writer's instinct. Like it was real natural because he's also a songwriter, but there was like a literary quality that did, I think, separate him from most singer songwriters. Yeah, I think his ability, his command of the language would have made him a very gifted writer if that had been his bent. You know what I mean?
Well, right, but I guess what I'm getting at though is that beyond just the literary capabilities, he had the ability to pull out your emotions. Like you can have one without the other. Few. I think there are a few that can pull off both of those things on top of each other, and that's what his unique gift was, I think.
Yeah, can't argue with that. Can't argue with that. Do you know how many albums he put out?
Let me see here, just a moment. You should only say this sort of thing when you have.
If you did, I didn't know if you had it.
Because now you're making me count while there's dead air here. But
well, no, because remember he did own his own record label, and we'll talk about it in a little bit too. I think, just because I don't want to give away the where we're going, but that he put out on Oh Boy Records had an album of covers of his own stuff. I think Oh Boy Records was his record label. It was one of the best tribute albums I've ever heard. So I have to give him some credit there too. He did own the record label that put it out, and he very tastefully curated that. It's one of the better cover records I can think of, or tribute albums I can think of. It's not a genre that's 100% hits. The fact that he was able to put out such a well curated album of his own stuff, he had the year too.
Yeah, he was big at championing, like, the Conor Obersts of the world and the Sturgill Simpsons of the world.
Yeah,
very helpful to those guys. By the way, 19 studio albums.
Wow. So the man has 19 studio albums over time. Did you ever have a chance to see him live? I did not.
I didn't. I will get to a story during the covers portion about a live experience, but I didn't actually see him live in person.
Interesting. All right. We started talking about doing this show a couple of days ago, and in that time, so many additional covers have come out. I don't know that we'll ever come back and do a John Prine covers part 2, but like literally, I think in the last 24 hours, Roger Waters put out a cover of not Souvenirs, but Roger Waters was like a huge John Prine fan. Has been talking about him for years and years and years and years. I have a feeling that I think we're going to have a pretty quality playlist today of John Prine covers. I think there's so many of them out there. We had a lot to work with. I think there'll be even more to work with, and I think there's going to be some fantastic stuff. So we definitely have our playlist together. We'll a lot of these performances aren't on Spotify. Obviously, they're on Twitter or TikTok or Zoom or wherever they happen to be at this time. We'll try to put some links in the show playlist notes. So you can look at some of these more recent fantastic performances. They do have an acoustic bent to them, but then so did he. So it's not surprising that there's lots of acoustic covers, but definitely I've not had a chance to listen to the most recent one from Roger Waters, but it feels like there's a ton have been made. A ton are probably on the way, but I think we did pretty well this week. I think what are we doing? 12 apiece?
Yeah, 12.
All right. Well, I forget if we have to go over, we can go over. I will defer to you today, sir, if you want to kick off our proceedings.
Okay. I'm going to start with I was just alluding to this. This is my live music portion of this. So I did see, Bonnie Raitt live when I was still in my teens, and I think John Prine at that point was just a name I had heard of. I don't think I'd ever heard any of his songs prior to this, but of course, Angel from Montgomery is a song that she's covered, I think, pretty much her whole career. And that was the first time I'd ever heard the song. And I was a teenager. But I was not too cool to cry a bit during that. Obviously, I still get pretty. I've always been pretty emotional when it comes to music. That's for sure. And
it was his calling card. He was great at it.
Yeah.
It's everybody who felt that way, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, it was just a great moment. It's a moment, that was a long time ago, but I'll never forget it. And it's just such a great song, and a lot of these songs that are on my list and both of our lists, I'm sure, are just songs that that it's just so easy to relate to, even though it was written in like 1970. Just the line, how the hell can a person go to work in the morning and come home in the evening with nothing to say? It just, like, that really hits it on the head. That the struggle of everyday work life. That you come home and you feel you don't feel fulfilled, even though you've spent the whole day working. You just come home and feel empty.
Yeah. I mean, Bruce Springsteen's Dance in the Dark. I don't think you get Dancing in the Dark without that. I get him in the evening, I ain't got nothing to say. I mean, you can't miss the continuity.
Yeah.
And Bruce would be the first to admit it. Did you see Bruce's quotes about John Prine after he passed?
I have not, but yeah, I mean, the other, talking about getting teary at a concert, like, I'm a pretty emotional person when it comes to music, but there aren't many times where I've ever teared up at a concert, and this would be one. And another that comes to mind is seeing Springsteen, the first time I ever saw him do Thunder Road in person.
Wow. Yeah, when Bruce came out the first time I saw him, I was having all the feels. You know what? I will never be able to admit the first concert that I can recall having the emotions well up, and I don't want to say cry, but to say teared up. It's an artist who is now reviled, and I can't admit who it is. But at least you got what you got.
Was it Ted Nugent?
No, it was never that bad. There's not a lot. If I was going to get teary-eyed over it, that actually would be, is there a song in the Ted Nugent catalog that would allow any tear of any kind to well up? Guessing no. I can never admit it. I shouldn't have even brought it up because I can't. I could never recover from it.
All right. Well, you either have to move on or say who it is.
All right. We're moving on. I will. I am going to go back to what it's not exact. I'm not. For me, one of the first John Prine covers that I really found myself like starting over to. Did I hear what I just heard? Was "Unwed Fathers" by Johnny Cash. I don't know if Johnny Cash did that song a lot live or not, but it was on. It was on a couple of those like Columbia Records compilations of his stuff. And I love Johnny. I mean, Johnny Cash was played for me by my parents. Like I probably knew hello, I'm Johnny Cash, probably before I said mom or dad, just based on the number of times I had to hear it. But his cover of Unwed Fathers, I have always loved, and I think for like Johnny Cash fans, that's considered his dark era, the mid '80s. A lot of the folks who came up in the '60s and '70s, the '80s weren't kind to, and I'd say Johnny Cash's '80s catalog, certainly on Columbia and Mercury Records, wouldn't be considered his prime. But damn, if he didn't pull out an incredible performance that really opened up the John Prine catalog for me. It really made me start to look for the songcraft in his stuff. And I admit, if it's the weight of Johnny Cash, the weight of his endorsement. And I realized, wow, if Johnny Cash finds this in this stuff, there has to be way more in there. So I have to go first with Johnny Cash here because it's really how I came to appreciate John Prine. I mean, I was 1 year old when the first John Prine album came out. It was you pick up some of it through osmosis growing up in Chicago, but it was the first endorsement that was like a heavy hitter endorsement for me for him was Johnny Cash. And I've never gone back and listened to the album it came from, which is called Rainbow in 1985. It does also have a cover of Have You Ever Seen the Rain? I'm gonna try to keep my love of Johnny Cash intact and not listen to that. So Unwed Fathers by Johnny Cash, I got to kick off just because I don't think I get to any John Prine appreciation without it.
All right, well, I'm the first mention. Johnny Cash also covered Sam Stone on Austin City Limits.
Nice.
So that's another Johnny Cash, John Prine cover. And a third Johnny Cash, John Prine cover is my number 2 song. And that's his version of Paradise from The Adventures of Johnny Cash. That's another song from John Prine's debut album, and another song that I think just has some golden lines to it. And basically the idea of the song is that it's his parents came from Kentucky, and it's John Prine as a kid in the premise of this song wanting to experience that paradise that his dad grew up with, and his father explaining to him that has been stripped clean by the coal mining companies. And I want to pull out a verse from this song. Then the coal company came with the world's largest shovel, and they tortured the timber and stripped all the land. They dug for their coal till the land was forsaken. Then they wrote it all down as the progress of man. And I think that's, again, that's another theme that unfortunately we have not, like a theme that you would hope would not be a timeless theme, but unfortunately it is.
Right. Yeah. I am doing this our show today from the Appalachians, or the Smokies anyway. I don't know if those are truly Appalachian or not, but it is amazing. Just the this part of the country, and if you think of the music that just flows out of this place, and how tied it is to the sort of the economic fortunes of everyone here. His subject matter on that one, again, the way politics have worked out, environmentalism has sort of been placed as being in opposition to working class people earning an honest living. It's particularly like in coal country, and it doesn't have to be like that. The people who are doing the coal mining are also raising their children here. They don't want their children getting 10 times the rate of normal cancer, and all the horrible things that you read about and hear about. I think it's going to take art eventually because politics is so easy to manipulate that it's one of those things, I know, and this is such a loaded thing to talk about because we're in a time right now where literally almost everyone in the society is begging our leadership to listen to the scientists, and it's very frustrating. I think for people who approach the world that way, it's very frustrating when the wall gets put up, and science would be politicized in that context. Art doesn't always come with the same bad baggage. I suspect it's as likely that it's going to be an artist, it's going to be song, it's going to be human storytelling that gets us over more than it is and any of the other stuff we've pinned our hopes to. And again, that's part of the stuff that again he was a master at. And again, I'm just riffing off your point about the fact that like if we had the world we should have, a young person picking up a John Prine record today should be able to listen to that and be like, wow, things sure were different in the past. That's just not how it is. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just not how it is. It's unfortunate that is going to be one of the things that sticks. You know, unfortunately, I have a feeling his music about life here is going to be relevant for way longer than I think any of us wish.
Well, and I was I think it was actually when he was on WTF that he was talking about when he wrote songs like that. Although he's talking about Sam Stone, and I'll get to more about that later, about Sam Stone specifically. But he was saying, you know, that he didn't expect it to be timeless. You know, he expected that it would be very dated. But it didn't. The world didn't work out that way.
Surely it did not. Yeah, that song's one that I see a lot. It's gotten a lot of that has been. I've been reading more about it. I have to go back and listen to it. I say that and end up saying that all the time. I know that when we recorded last week, like I wasn't sitting there thinking. I was sitting there thinking, I will have time to go into the John Prine catalog. There'll be time. You know what I mean? I felt like the news was that he was on the mend. You know. And there wasn't time. I mean, that's the hard part. I mentioned that tribute album on Oh Boy Records, Broken Hearts and Dirty Windows. I can't think of a dud on it. I'm not sure how many of the songs from that record you have on your list. I do have a few.
I would have had a few. I tried to. I think I only ended up with one because I didn't want to. Because I knew, you know, that you had some on yours, and you have some that would have been on mine, but I didn't really need them because there's so many. Yeah. But I figured as long as we're mentioning, you know, that how good it is, you know, then that's probably all you need to know, and everybody should go check it out because it is excellent.
Yeah, I picked first to talk about the Justin Townes Earl cover of "Far From Me," and I admit I don't know Justin Townes Earl's entire catalog, but I swear I stumble upon covers of his. I probably owe him some more time too. Not to necessarily go off topic, but his cover of Paul Simon's "Graceland" is one of my my all-time favorites. And I don't have a ton of history. I don't have a ton of Justin Townes Earl playlists, but when I make playlists with Justin Townes Earl on them, his cover of "Far From Me" on this record is frequently on it. Again, Justin Townes Earl is a young man comparatively speaking to John Prine, and it's many years ahead of him. But I do hear sort of, I mean, his father, I think, was an elite level performer, songwriter.
And we should mention that Steve Earle is his father.
Yeah.
And he takes the name, it was named after Townes Van Sant.
Yeah. He, I think, has some of that, the master in him too. I really think he's up there. So this is another one going back to early in his career for "Far From Me," but I think John Prine pretty much performed that his entire career too, did he not?
I think so, and I have to say, "Far From Me," it honestly, like, it is definitely one of his most underrated songs. Like, I think maybe because it was on his debut, and there's so many big big ones off of that debut album, that it gets overshadowed by those. It's Far From Me is a great song.
Yeah, I'll leave it with this. Like, I think because that, to your point earlier, because there's so many heavy hitters on that first album, I'm not sure people think of this as a marquee one, but I think if it had been put on later records and maybe had a little more sun, I think people would gravitate to it a little bit more. Not that anybody's having a hard time gravitating to it, but I really like. I find Justin Townes Earl to be a really, really good songwriter, and again, I think he has the songwriting mastery, and he does make beautiful covers, and I really, really like his cover of "Far From Me" from the John Prine tribute album, "Broken Hearts" and "Dirty Windows" from 2010.
Yeah, and I have to say, if as great as that tribute album is, if there is only one song that I could pull from it, it would be that one. That would be the one.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Okay, so my next song is one I had to fight you for a little bit. That's and I did have a backup just in case, which was a pretty good backup. But the next song on my list is "Hello in There," which is the 10,000 Maniacs version from Campfire Songs. "Hello in There" is another great song from that debut album, and I should just mention that my backup would have been Chris Christopherson and Joan Baez duetting on taken from Chris Christopherson Extras, which is also excellent and also one to check out. But "Hello," and there's a song that so I don't know if this is where it comes from, but John Prine, while he was, or at least leading up to the point where he had that gig at the Fifth Peg in Old Town, was a mail carrier. And I don't know if that's where it comes from, but it's a song about where he's thinking about what life is like as an old person, just kind of being forgotten. The line from the song is, "Old people just grow lonesome, waiting for somebody to say hello in there." And it kind of sounds like it might be related to being a mail carrier and coming into contact with old people and thinking about their lives, but I don't really know if that's what it inspired it, but it is a great song.
Yeah, that's another one everybody loves. Up next, I think I've talked about Betty LaVette on our show probably more than I have in my entire life combined. Like, I don't walk around talking about Betty LaVette, but she's from Detroit. She's one of the last women standing of that original class of like great 60s soul singers, and she's always been masterful in her covers, and she's done like themed cover albums from in this century. She did one called "Child of the 70s," and because it's recorded in 2006, I think people are tempted to think of this as just being some sort of cash-in for her, like, because I mean, I don't think there's anybody who really cares enough about it to do this, but like, there are artists from the 60s and 70s who do these cover albums that are just cash-ins, and I not only do I not believe that in her case, she covered Neil Young's "Heart of Gold" within like 2 years of it coming out. You know what I mean? Like, she was. This is not an affectation for her. I think she's an omnivore for great songwriting, and I think when something clicks with her, she is able to bring out performances in herself that I can't imagine are any more impactful than if she had written them. And one of them that I would put on that list is her cover of "Souvenirs." I had a really hard time making this list. I did go overboard with "Unwed Fathers." I think I have "Unwed Fathers" on here a couple of times. "Souvenirs" is another one of those songs I think I could have probably pulled half a dozen covers of, but I'm going to give it to Betty LaVette here just because the intensity of the performance. Like again, I don't. There's no reason to suppose that any recording artist is ever faking it per se, but it's just too effortless and too. It just lands too hard. It's appropriately reverent, but it's hers. So Betty LaVette, "Child of the '70s" is the album. There's quite a bit on there that I like. If you can find her cover of "Heart of Gold," I think it was just on a 7-inch, and I actually think it was on Reprise Records at the time, if I'm not mistaken. But this wasn't just a cash in for her. She's been about it since this stuff was new. Look it up. "Souvenirs" from Betty LaVette.
So what year did she record it?
2006.
Oh, okay. So another similar version of "Souvenirs," actually, to her version. So Maggie Bell, who was a Scottish singer on Swan Song, on the Led Zeppelin Swan Song label.
Yes.
In 1974, she covered "Souvenirs," and it was also a soul arrangement of it, and great. So with that in mind, I figure I should mention that now.
Let's put it on our playlist for sure if we can find it.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that when you go next. It might already be there too, actually, but I'll have to check. All right, so the next one on my list, Al Cooper in 1973 did his version of Sam Stone, which was later featured on Al's Big Deal and Al Cooper Anthology. And he did like a gospel influenced arrangement of it, which is just stellar. And Sam Stone is another song, and I alluded to this earlier, that this is what I believe it was WTF that John Prine was on when he talked about this. Sam Stone is a song about a Vietnam vet who comes back home, and in Vietnam he was given morphine for his injury, and this developed into a heroin habit when he returned home. And it's about that, coming home, and you have a heroin habit. And on WTF, he was talking about how at the time he thought that was very specific to Vietnam, and that the song would be, very, very dated and very attached to that moment in time. But of course, we've had other conflicts since then where this is a common story. It's a story that repeats itself over and over. And I'll pull a verse from that as well. So the line goes, the morphine eased the pain, and the grass grew around his brain and gave him all the confidence he lacked, with a purple heart and a monkey on his back. I just want to pull that out as an example of Prine's way with words. And it is unfortunately, it is unfortunately timeless. But Al Cooper had a great arrangement of that, and that's my number 4.
Does Al Cooper have a biography? I suppose I could just look it up. He has led an extraordinarily interesting life, and he's underrated.
Yeah,
he's really underrated. All right, the next one I have is maybe a little bit of a cheat. But I'm asking you to be as indulgent as possible. So this is I don't know if it's a pure cover per se, but it is a song that he wrote in the mid-'80s with Donnie Fritz. Now, I do not want to act like I am some lifelong Donnie Fritz fan. I only know Donnie Fritz because I bought a compilation. I think it was called Country Got Soul, which it was just this, it was like this compilation trying to make a case that there's actually a lot of funky country music if you just try hard enough. And whoever the curator of that album is really tried pretty hard. And they got Donnie Fritz on it in his song Short End of the Stick. And it's just one of those songs I've always loved. So when I found out that Donnie Fritz and John Prine had written a song together, I definitely was interested in it. That is the song "The Oldest Baby in the World." And I don't necessarily want to pull any couplets out because I'm not sure who wrote exactly what, but it does have one of my favorite witticisms of youth is a costume. Again, it's not like pulling a couplet out. It's just a zinger, and I'm not even 100% positive John Prine wrote it, but he put his name on authorship of the song in which it's contained. So I'm gonna want to say that's enough for osmosis. I don't know what album John Prine recorded on it. I think there's a live recording of it, but if this is as much a recommendation for. Again, John Prine given the vote of confidence to Donnie Fritz. I give the vote of confidence to Donnie Fritz too. It was he was in good company, so I'm putting it on there. I might throw on Short End of the Stick in our playlist too. Just it's a fun song, and if for some reason it's just one of those songs on a compilation it's stuck with me for 20 years. Finding him in John Prine's orbit wasn't a huge surprise for me. So if I can get a little more of that into anybody's ears, I think that's worthy. So Oldest Baby in the World.
And okay, is this? I believe that is this the version that he does with Willie Nelson?
You're catching me. You're catching me, son. I was unaware there was one.
Well, yeah, there is.
All right. Well, I got to it through Donnie Fritz. I know that because I'm just a damn weirdo, I guess. But I have no doubt that the Willie version is also tight.
Well,
I'm going to look that up while you go.
It's Donnie Fritz with Willie Nelson.
Oh, yeah. Well, then I definitely haven't heard it.
Okay. All right. And by the way, Oldest Baby in the World is also one that holds up with time pretty well, I would say.
Yeah.
All right. My next one is this is one of my favorite John Prine songs, and I'm not necessarily saying it's as good as some of his best, but it's one of his best. I don't know where to rank it really, but it's one I really like a lot, and there are a lot of versions of it. Not a lot of versions I really love, but the version I went with for Speed of the Sound of Loneliness is the Lemonheads version from Varshan's 2. I've always liked Evan Dando a lot, so it's not very difficult for me to go with his version of a tune. Yeah, and you know, not much to say about it. But yeah, that's my number 5 is Lemonheads version of Speed of the Sound of Loneliness.
So, Mr. Flick, one of the points you make often is that when a band is really, really good or really, really technically proficient, it's hard to find good covers of them. Like, if a band's stuff is just so tied to them, it's really hard to find great covers.
I wouldn't say it's always true. Like that's probably... there are just more than one way to go about it, but I said this in relation to Rush because I think it's hard to do a Rush song without trying to tackle that.
Yep.
But the only way you can do it though is probably to just come out of left field with a totally different arrangement of things.
Yeah. It's like with Prince too. Prince is hard to cover, and most great Prince covers are people doing exactly what you said, which is just coming out of left field with an arrangement that is reverent to the spirit, but not the execution. As many covers as there are of John Prine, I really wanted to find. I'm not aware of a ton of covers of the song "In Spite of Ourselves," so I cheated a little bit and I looked them up. Mostly because I just wanted an excuse to talk about that album again and that particular song. And I would never recommend anybody go directly to a cover. Because if you don't know the album and song In Spite of Ourselves, definitely start there. But I it's to the point you were making, and we both made now, is that his early stuff was so much a part of its time, and it was so important to so many people who are important to you and I, that it's easy to focus on that era and its fertile ground. I mean, I bet we could have done this on just 70s covers, but it would have missed the point, which is that he was able to still land high quality stuff throughout the entirety of his career, even when he was doing primarily covers himself. So I put on Christy Lee Akers, who I don't know a ton about, and I won't claim that I have rifled through her catalog to get all that much more into her stuff. But she's in the last 10 years or so, she's had a couple albums, and she does a duet on In Spite of Ourselves that I like a lot. It's not on a covers album. It's just dropped there in the middle of her record. And again, start with the original, but I this is probably more information than we should be sharing. When I was younger, and I don't think I'm the only one, you sometimes would make mix CDs for a person who was the object of your affection. And I had several instances where I made mix CDs or tapes for someone who I was interested in, and I put in Spite of Ourselves on it. I had no game. Is the only way I think the only thing you can deduce from that. That's not what you lead with the ladies. I was young. I didn't know any better, and it never worked. So I love the song, but I had like a little bit of, I'm like, maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but I think if I'd had this cover, I could have done a little better. I think having a little more female sympathy to it, it might have done. It might have been more magical on the CD mixes I was sharing. So if the first version of it isn't an immediate hit with you, give this one a try, particularly if you're of the female persuasion. See if that version does it for you. I think the original will land it. I'm not trying to woo you either, by the way. I'm just stating my truth. Like, I thought I was pulling an awesome one out when I did that, and the lyrics, I'm not going to recite them here. You'll figure it out if you don't know the song already. But it is having it be a female-led version does add some nuance that maybe I could have done a little better with. I'm not the only one who does that, right, Flick? Like, come on, everybody's done that at one point, right? Yeah, okay. I guess I'm the only person I know who would have included John Prine's In Spite of Ourselves. It's a long story. I'll spare you. But
and now people do it with playlists.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. It's a great song. It's one of my favorites by him. But I don't know. You're not gonna woo the ladies with it. I'm not sure.
All right. My number 6 is Chris Hillman's version of It's Happening to You from Morning Sky. I love Chris Hillman. He, of course, was a Flying Burrito Brother and also a member of the Byrds. I love his harmonies and you know, it's really hard to find a version of this song. He is one of the rarest who have actually covered this.
All right, boy, this next one's hard because we've talked about it already, and I can't go in on it too deep, but there's no chance I wasn't going to have Paradise on my playlist somewhere. I went with the Dwight Yoakam version. Maybe that was me being a little bit lazy, but I consider Dwight Yoakam to be a absolute covers master too. Mm-hmm. And this one comes from a record of his called Dwight's Used Records from 2014. But again, Dwight's all-time favorite for me. I'm a big fan, particularly of his covers, and he's got good taste. The album also does contain a cover of Understand Your Man from Johnny Cash, and it has ZZ Top's I'm Bad, I'm Nationwide. Like, Dwight also had some range. I also think while he does a lot of rock and stuff, he's got a really subtle touch, I think, and I think he's underestimated as in his and how subtle and how nuanced his touch is. So not surprised to find that Dwight Yoakam's a big fan of John Prine. They both had that. They both have that sort of master's light touch. But there's a lot of versions of Paradise I don't think you can go wrong with. There's probably a dozen you can't go wrong with. I'm kind of confessing. I was looking for an excuse to talk about Dwight Yoakam, and his cover of Paradise is as good as I need, I think.
Yeah, never a bad idea to talk about Dwight Yoakam. I like his version a lot too. That I so on my list I had a lot of backups, and that was my backup to the Johnny Cash version of Paradise.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we could probably find half a dozen stellar covers. If we go to market with Johnny Cash and Dwight Yoakam, we're doing all right.
That's right. All right. Well, okay. So number 7 on my list is Grandpa Boy with his version. I should say. I mean, Grandpa Boy is Paul Westerberg's alias. So Paul Westerberg's version of Souvenirs under the alias Grandpa Boy from Dead Man Shake. Souvenirs is a song using toys. That. Growing up with toys, like as a metaphor for the things that you lose throughout life. You lose things, but you more importantly lose people as you go through life. And so along with the toys, you lose loved ones. And yeah, then my backup was the Maggie Bell version that we talked about a little bit earlier from 1974 on Swan Song. And I have just added that to our Spotify list. The backup.
It's quality. I'm dipping into the cover album again. Although with the My Morning Jacket cover of All the Best, as time goes by, I find myself when the Monsters of Folk album came out, I would say of all of the folk monsters on that album, I was probably least tuned to the Jim James vibe at that time, but over time I would say I've really gone in heavy with him, and it's the 2 covers albums that he did a few years back that really cemented it for me. Jim James of My Morning Jacket. Again, I don't want to go around acting like I'm the biggest My Morning Jacket fan in the world, but I find Jim James is getting better with time in my humble estimation, and he did an entire album of George Harrison covers, all of which were like sufficiently reverent that you can hear the love in them, but he's got his own thing. He doesn't do like dramatic changes with arrangements. He doesn't necessarily go for the counterintuitive, and yet none of it sounds stale and none of it sounds rote. Again, it's one of these guys who just loves music, and I think he just and is he's open to so many ideas, and he doesn't have to change things all that dramatically to be great, but he also has the ability to do that. So again, I don't want to talk about the album too much, but the tribute album he put out, I thought the My Morning Jacket cover of All the Best was strong on there, and but I wasn't a huge fan at the time, but I've gone back now that I'm a bigger fan of Jim James, and I appreciate it even more than I did before. I think Jim James also does, he's one of the very few respectable covers of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. That's really saying something. That's a master's hand. If you can make Emerson, Lake and Palmer palatable, you got something. But he didn't have to work that hard with this one. All the Best from the Broken Hearts album.
Well, and I suppose that's also taking on a high degree of musicianship. So that's the second week in a row where we've mentioned the Monsters of Folk, and so since I left one of them out last week, we'll just go through it now. So there's Conor Oberst, Bright Eyes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There's Jim James. There's M. Ward and Ben Gibbard. Ben Gibbard, I forgot last week, so
yeah,
a little house cleaning.
I think we can do a Monsters of Folk draft sometime. I think that would be tight, but we'll get there. We'll see.
You mean meaning each of their respective careers? Yeah,
I think what we should have to draft with from all of them to make a single playlist, not 4 playlists, but one playlist of all their stuff.
Yeah,
that will be competitive. That'll be tough.
That makes sense. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna skip around my list a little bit more. So this is what, number 8. This is 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this this next one is a cover of Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore from Ethan Daniel Davidson. And come to think of it, Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore was also from the first album. So that's another one off of that album.
Wow. Yeah.
That was a gigantic album. And I love this version of the song because even though Ethan Daniel Davidson is himself a folk singer, he did a very punk arrangement of this song, and it fits really well because again, this is another theme that holds up. And I'm just going to, instead of talking through it, I'm just going to give you a verse from the song. Or I guess really the chorus of the song. Your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. They're already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reason's for, and your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. And I think it's another theme that holds up really well, and taking it from a folk song to a punk song, I think suits it very well.
That's another one of those songs that you would think time would have left in the dust, that it was an anachronism from another time, but can't think of a time since that song was originally put out that there wasn't somewhere where that wasn't relevant.
Yeah, flag decals and flag pins, they're still very prevalent.
Yeah. Indeed. Up next, this is I don't want to act like I am a somebody who just pores over every nuance of the Loretta Lynn catalog, and I think of her as primarily being a songwriter and a musician first, and I think her doing covers is usually, especially when she was further on in her career and had more control over what she was doing. This was from an album, I think, in 2000, which if I'm not mistaken, is pre-Jack White, right? When did the Jack White, the album with Portland, come out? Do you recall by chance?
No, I don't know. I don't remember off the top of my head what year that
was. I think this is sort of one of these. There was that time where the old classic country artists, everybody kind of wanted to do what Johnny Cash did, which is to get somebody from the modern era. In Johnny Cash's case, it was Rick Rubin. Like, there was a lot of pressure to do what Johnny Cash did, which is to come out with this string of incredible, wonderful albums like the American Recordings albums are for Johnny Cash. This, I think, came out from her like right before she hooked up with Jack White and was able to get the Jack White blessing to carry her forward. And I really do love that song. I actually think that album is good, and I think the song Portland is great. But she did a cover in 2000 on her album Still Country of Somewhere Someone's Falling in Love, which I can't say was never like a super top tier cut for me for John Prine. And I'm not saying Loretta Lynn's version is better. I don't really know the original all that well. But I would listen to Loretta Lynn, read her grocery receipts. I guess I'm biased and I'm a sucker in her favor, but I dig it. And my only thing in looking back in hindsight is if she'd maybe waited an album or two and had Jack White producing this one, I think it would have stood out in her catalog a little more than it does now. But from 2000, from the album Still Country, Somewhere Someone's Falling in Love by Loretta Lynn.
Yeah, I agree on the pick. I like this song, and you might be right. It could have been even better in Jack White's hands. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, my next one I'm gonna put up. Let's see. Okay, so this is from a tribute album of Chicago artists called The Postman Delivers, and it's Rob Brookman and Zero Sum, and the song is People Putting People Down. Another, I mean, this isn't one of the older John Prine songs necessarily, but still, like, a very timeless thing. This is something I think very easily applies to the way things are on the internet these days, on Twitter or wherever. Just the idea, you know, that people. Well, so the line is, all the people who don't fit get the only fun that they get from people putting people down, and that really kind of hints at something I think universal. Just the idea that people that don't fit in don't often put themselves in other people's shoes, and they have to find their own targets, and it unfortunately holds up, like a lot of these songs. And yeah, unfortunately, another timeless theme.
So up next, again, I'm sort of cheating a little bit, and someday we're gonna need to like run an AI program to figure out why we have certain recurring themes. But damn it, the rapacious appetite for Geffen Records to sign alternative acts in the early '90s rears its head again. I don't. That event must be more significant than we originally sized up. There is a John Prine co-written song on Peter Case's record "Six Pack of Love," which was released on Geffen Records in 1992, and the album is called "Six Pack of Love," and the John Prine Peter Case co-authored song is called Wonderful 99. Now that album, again, I had, and not to keep berating the record company thing, but I remember seeing this Peter Case record in the cutout bins all the time. And one day I just looked at it and realized, like, oh, it has a bunch of other artists that he co-wrote with. Like, and so it was cheap enough and I got it. And I don't know, Peter Case is always one of those artists that I always thought had a potential of like really breaking through, or really, you know, finally becoming sort of a household name, because he had that kind of potential, and for whatever reason that didn't happen. And the Six Pack of Love album isn't necessarily a great album, but I like the song Wonderful 99, and I picked it because I went and looked it up on Wikipedia, and under the section called critical reception, it's almost Spinal Tap-esque, the reception that this album got. So the only thing listed on Peter Case's Six Pack of Love is a quote from music critic Denise Sullivan of AllMusic, who called the album a failed attempt at expanding his folk roots and augmenting it with the tricky production of Mitchell Froom. Case's simple songs were lost in the morass. Now, that's really nasty. And she's saying it about not just Peter Case being lost here, but she's also saying that about like John Prine. She's saying that about Billy Swan, who has multiple songwriting credits on this album. Like, and Mitch, I think Mitchell Froom around that time had produced Suzanne Vega, right? I think that's.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's how he was a hot producer, and I think she had just had the Tom's Diner thing do well. So I just sort of put this together in my mind that, like, okay, they got a producer who had some hit records around that time. Peter Case has always sort of been at the periphery of alternative or alt folk or whatever it is, and he gets signed to Geffen, and they pay for a real producer, they pay for real studio time. The album is just got trashed. It's not the greatest album in the world, but calling it a failed attempt is so nasty and wrong, and I just think that it was even if it wasn't his greatest moment. Wonderful 99 is a great little song, and during the early 90s on Geffen Records, I don't know, calling that a failed attempt is just overstatement. So I want to give it another chance, give people a chance to go back and give it a listen. I'm not saying it's either their best work, but failed attempt seems so wrong in this case, and unfortunately, like many of the things we're talking about, the subject matter is more relevant than it should be. So Wonderful 99, which is technically a Peter Case written song, but it's co-written with John Prine, and I think it deserves another airing. from
Yeah,
1992.
I give that a thumbs up as well. And do you want to stress it isn't so much an issue that Geffen signed all those bands. It's the way they handled them once they were signed.
Yeah. It's just the early '90s major label records we were sort of transitioning out of that horrible synthesizer. I always think of Don Johnson's Heartbeat as the poster child for what went wrong in the '80s, and how many like great artists from the '70s ended up putting records that sounded like they could have been on the an extra track from a Don Johnson reissue. Like there was a really bad stretch of music there. And the early '90s didn't necessarily rescue us from all of it. There was some clunker shit out there, but Peter Case doesn't deserve that, and neither did John Prine.
Okay, my next one, I'm just going to go two in a row from the Postman Delivers. Lizzie Ellison and her version of Fish and Whistle, which definitely gives a very different feel to that song, which I like a lot. Don't have too much else to say. It's two from the same album, so yeah, that's kind of it.
Well, this hints we might be able to make a topic out of which artist has the best tribute and cover albums. I'm starting. John Prine has to be in that chat. Like he has to be up there.
Yeah.
He was blessed in that regard for sure. Up next, I am grabbing something from Kurt Weill. It is from an EP of his called Parallelogram. It is. I don't know the album very well, and it's co-credited to Steve Gunn, who I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know a ton about him. First of all I would have need to know was Kurt Weill, spelling it Vile, and I was going to like him. Like I wouldn't have had to hear one note from him to know I was going to like him. And it turns out he's not everything he does is stellar, but when he's good, he's great, and he has great taste in music. And I must also tell you, the third song on the album is called Red Apples for Tom Sharpling. We're we're going to have to talk about Tom Sharpling and our mutual admiration for your and my admiration for him. I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah. Go ahead.
Well, he's nothing short of a hero.
And I owe you for life because you're playing for me the segment of his on the Gathering of the Juggalos. I still go back and listen to it. There are very few audio recordings in the world that have provided me more joy than Tom Sharpling talking about the Gathering of the Juggalos. I think we might even need to do a show on it someday. Whether we do or don't, on this Parallelogram EP by Mr. Kurt Weill is a cover of Way Back Then. And again, I want to talk as much about John Prine, but if you're not a Kurt Weill fan, I'd be surprised if you've made it this far with us on this show. If Kurt Weill is not on your radar, but he's of a generation after your and my generation, Mr. Flick. He's one of the kids, but boy, is he good, and really has a great ear, and really has done a pretty great job of pulling together elements from the past and making familiar forms sound fresh again. Finding him with some John Prine love is no surprise. So it's an endorsement of Kurt Weill in general. If you just sample his catalog a little bit, it ain't going to take you too long to find a winner. But if you want to start with his John Prine cover, you could do worse.
Yeah, and you're right. He about his taste as well, and his covers are great. He has also covered Neil Young among others.
Yeah, he's Walking on a Pretty Day is one of my favorites by him. Pretty Pimpin' was a very, very heavily streamed song. He did the album with Courtney Barnett, which I don't know if that album is an A+, but again, finding those two together didn't surprise me at all, because they both are great in ways that are similar. Like they both have just that incredible. They have great taste and they can write. It's so uncommon that you find people who can do that. I want to rep for his song though, Jesus Fever from 2011, from his album Smoke Ring for My Halo. That I overlooked that on our best of the teens, and that is a critical overlook. But that's it for another time.
Yeah, agreed on all counts. And yeah, the album with Courtney Barnett, I would say I like less than probably their stuff apart, but I like both of them. But yes, not that I want to, sway anybody from that album either.
Yeah, she's we could do a whole show on her. I think. I know you could.
Oh, I certainly could. I'm like an uber fan of Courtney Barnett.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Okay, so my next one is one of John Prine's most recent songs, Summer's End, which was done by Nathaniel Ratliff and Courtney Marie Andrews. And I'll pull a verse out of this song as well. This Valentines break hearts and minds at random. That old Easter egg ain't got no leg to stand on. I can see that you can't win for trying, and New Year's Eve is bound to leave you crying. He was still writing stuff like that toward the end of his career. No real drop off in terms of quality.
Yeah, that's what's amazing. He was touring, I think, up till he got sick. Like he was still. Think about the fight with cancer he had. He was tough as hell, and he was still on the road in his 70s, and he could still pull. He could still pull an ace. This is just a very rare company in that regard. All right, this is so chintz. I just got to get it out of the way. I'm going to go back. This is my last visit to the Broken Hearts album, and I don't know if this one would have been on your list, Master Flick, because I'm going back for Unwed Fathers again. But it's an excuse to talk about Deer Tick. Deer Tick ended up sort of underachieving, but man, when their album War Elephant, I think this is like mid to late 2000s came out, and that album was like a real slow burn. Like I think they'd been around a while with it, and just over time, it reminds me. It's every once in a while you get those albums that kind of kick around for a while, and it takes a bit for people to sort of catch what's up and dig into it. I highly recommend the War Elephant album. It's not all killer. There's a tiny amount of filler on it, but wow, it's really, really good. They kind of fell off a little bit after that, but they came back. Their next album, I think it was called Born on Flag Day, was 2009, and then they did this cover of Unwed Fathers on that tribute album I've talked about 50 million times. Give it a try if you find any daylight in it. If you like it even a little bit, definitely go back for Deer Tick's War Elephant. It's a kind of an overlooked gem. And I again, Unwed Fathers. I still have another cover of Unwed Fathers to talk about. It is what it is. I've always thought that was one of his better story songs, or one of his better character development songs. And while Deer Tick weren't masters, they did a pretty good job with it.
Okay, so is this number 12 now?
Let me see here. Yes. No. I have one. You went first. Did you go first? I think you did.
I went first. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. This is your 12. But you certainly can. You can go long if you have another couple.
Well, I'm going to give a 12th one and not do any double dipping. But then I think I'll just give a quick mention of some other ones that are on our Spotify list.
Yep.
Okay. So for my last one, it's pretty good. Another song that goes back to the debut album, and it's covered by the Get You along with Casey Musgraves. One thing that is, I guess, true of my list, not for any particular purpose. Well, kind of for a purpose. I would say a good at least 80% of the covers you might find of John Prine are bluegrass covers, which is fine. But one thing I did try to do with my list is not have anything that like anything that sounds too much the same. So I think I gave a pretty good variety of different arrangements on my list, which wasn't the only thing I was going for. I was also going for like the ones that I like the most, obviously, as well. And I guess. Oh boy, I guess that means I left off the one from. Okay, so maybe I'll give a little bonus one here quickly as well. So the one that I was going to include, actually there were two. I'll give two quick ones, quick other ones from that tribute album, Broken Hearts and Dirty Windows. Daddy's Little Pumpkin by Drive-By Truckers, and Wedding Day in Funeralville by Conor Oberst. So I cheated a little bit. I got 14 on my list, and I'll come back and then mention a few others that are on our Spotify list after you give your.
Well, I don't know the history of the song "Long Monday" by John Prine. I think it's from his later era. The publishing on it says 2005 from the album Fair and Square. I have to be honest, I don't know the album Fair and Square all that well. It's his 15th record. But to bolster my point earlier that he was able to pick up devotees from subsequent generations, which not everybody from his era was able to do. Dashboard Confessional, who I'm normally, just being honest, I wouldn't cross the street to listen to. I do like their cover of Long Monday. I believe it's an entire album of covers by Dashboard Confessional. It does have "It's the End of the World as We Know It" and "I Feel Fine." I'm gonna have to pull it out and listen to it, but it's a cover of Long Monday. The word emo didn't exist when I was like 15, and I probably would have, if I'd been 15 in 10 years later, I think I probably would have been a little more emo than is healthy. I was a Smiths fan when I was 14, so I mean, what can you do? I don't know the Dashboard Confessional catalog all that well, but again, to sort of drive home the point that one of the things that made John Prine great is that he was not purely a stuck in the confines of that first album. You can go deeper into their stuff, and you can find people with lots of different approaches and lots of different angles who find rich veins to mine. So throwing in, going to close her down with "Long Monday" by the Dashboard Confessional.
Okay, so a couple other ones to at least highlight on our Spotify list. So there's another version of "Angel from Montgomery" that I think is pretty good. It was done by Liz Manville, Mary Lane, and Shirley Johnson from an album called "Angels Sing the Blues." Very gospel arrangement of "Angel from Montgomery." Twin Bandit with a good version of "Long Monday." So that's another cover of "Long Monday" that was a good one. Kim Carnes with "If You Don't Want My Love."
That's bold.
Yeah, well, I gotta say, I still to this day probably only know a couple of songs that Kim Carnes did, and that's one of the two, or maybe 3 or 4. I don't know, but not many. But that's a good one. Let me see here. So
Tammy Wynette's "Unwed Fathers." I don't need to talk about "Unwed Fathers" again, but I mean, it's Tammy Wynette.
Sure. Yeah, feel free to chime in.
Yeah.
So also from Broken Hearts and Dirty Windows. Let me see. The Lamb Chop version of 6 O'Clock News is very good.
That's on that the 2010 record, right?
Yeah, that's Broken Hearts and Dirty Windows.
Yeah. That's good.
And Knocking on Your Screen Door from Sights. Christmas in Prison, which was on Emerge Records' Christmas compilation last year. Lucinda Williams with his Golden Messenger. And let's see.
Did neither of us came up with one for Illegal Smile?
Is that right? Let me see.
I don't have one. No, that's kind of.
Well, not on my 12, but let me see. Yeah, also not one on our Spotify list either.
We may have to dig that one up because that was always a song which, again, I know it was sort of tongue in cheek, but not really. Like a lot of his stuff. Like, yeah, it's friendly in its approach, but if you spend a little time with it, it's about something bigger.
A Legal Smile, if I'm interpreting right, is from smoking weed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, but I mean, this is when I'm embarrassed. John Sinclair, right? Isn't John Sinclair the guy who went to prison for like one joint in Detroit? I think he was the manager. I think he's the manager of the MC5. I think John Lennon wrote the song John Sinclair about him going to prison for having like one or two joints. It's one of the things that's hard to convey these days is how much. And again, there's been documentation since then from people who were around Richard Nixon at the time when the beginning of the sort of the war on drugs started for real. That was the laws against marijuana were designed to give the people, the police or the government, an excuse to go after people they didn't like, and you could at that time go to prison. And there's people still sitting in prison who did nothing more than have a few joints on them. You know what I mean? Like there was a time where the sort of nudge, wink, wink aspects of pot smoking could become very, very serious. And I think the war on drugs is, in my opinion, not to be political, is mostly a failure. I mean, if there's a war on drugs, the drugs won. And while he's talking about I don't necessarily think he's like put out a big dissertation about the war on drugs, but the point is wanting to have a joint or relax with some pot back in the late 60s, early 70s, while everybody did it, you could end up having your life completely fucked up by it. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't intended to be super heavy maybe at its time, but it's part of something that was super heavy. And I think it has value as an artifact, not just as a song. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. I feel like he got that right. Like all the other things that we've talked about today, like he was able to get down to some pretty essential issues and documented it pretty. Yeah, I think he pretty much got most of that stuff right. It's stuff that we shouldn't be able to relate to today, but here we are. It's one of the reasons he has staying power.
Yeah. Okay. So another good one off of The Postman Delivers. You got Gold by a band called Four Pilots, and a band called Amigo with a cover of Everybody. And there's still some more there. John Denver with Spanish Pipe Dream from Cedar Rapids, I should say.
Live in Cedar Rapids, yes.
Live in Cedar Rapids, 5 Seasons Center, 1987.
Were you there?
No, I was not there.
If I had a time machine and could speak to the 17-year-old me who was in Cedar Rapids that night, I would have said, go see John Denver.
Well, even though you didn't and will not be able to do that, you can listen to the recording.
It's like being there.
That's right. Except you can't see any of it.
That's probably better. It wasn't much of a visual act.
I assume not.
That's a pretty, I think nobody's going to have a hard time finding John Prine covers to listen to these days, but I think we curated well, and other than not necessarily repping for Illegal Smile right away, we didn't miss too much, I don't think. Can you think of any big uns that we didn't cover?
What's that?
Can you think of any big tunes that we didn't cover? I can't think of too many.
No, there aren't too many. There are maybe a few, at least if you're just talking about the 24 songs that we mentioned in our list, or I guess 26 with the 2 extra on my list. But yeah, I mean, our Spotify list has 42 of them, so there are even more there to choose from.
Woo! All right, well, that is yeoman's work. We say this all the time, and there's an article I'm gonna have to send you to remind me that like a lot of musical heroes are now in their 70s and 80s, and it's just it's a misfortune of the time that we're starting to hit that era where a lot of people who are sort of fundamental to music as we understand it are in their twilight years, and it's one of those things where I don't know if there's a perfect way to go about it. There's when John Prine passes away, I mean, it's a topic that we shouldn't even want to avoid. Like we have to cover it. I wish it was under better circumstances, but
Yeah,
you know,
always happy to pay tribute. Don't want to have to, do it for under these sort of circumstances. It would be nice to just randomly say this is the time where we should pay tribute to this person, and do it that way instead of doing it when somebody has passed.
Yeah. I don't know. There's I don't know. The only thing I could say is that we were talking about him last week, and think of the I think I don't know if it was necessarily a shock that he passed, but think of the outpouring of love towards him just when he was sick, and it looked like he was getting the worst of it, and then it looked like he was getting the better of it. Like that was news. You know what I mean? That was not just music nerd news. That was, I think, on most of the news aggregator sites, the big news aggregator sites were sort of tracking along in how he was doing. I hope, while I wish he was with us, I hope that in that week where he came out of the ICU, I think, or he was in really bad shape and then he was sort of stable, it was always serious. I do hope he had a chance to have told to him or explained to him just how many people were following his condition and how much love there was for him. I hope he got to feel that. He's one of those artists who is eulogized and takes his place in history. But for him, like he didn't always get the level of accolades from the general public that he got from other artists, and I know that he was very proud of that. But I think the way the news followed it, like I think his importance to American music, I think it really dawned on everybody like, wow, we could lose somebody who's bedrock important to our culture and music as we understand it. I do hope for him that there was some way he was able to feel that, because the way he passed is rough, and he was a tough person to have cancer, I think, of the throat and the lungs, and then to have this thing grabbing onto his lungs, and for him to make it as long as he did, like that's I hope for all of the difficulties that presents for him, I do hope he got to feel the outpouring. I mean, it was literally an outpouring of love. He earned it.
Yeah, he definitely earned that. He got his due by a certain segment of the population, and most of them are other songwriters, which isn't, certainly he had the utmost respect of his peers, which is great. Certainly not a household name, but just, an incredible songwriter, incredible artist.
We'll be back next week, I think. Have we decided our topic for next week?
So next week we'll be doing another segment of I'm Gonna Make You Love Me with Guided by Voices and Magnetic Fields. And you'll be listening to Guided by Voices, and I'll be listening to Magnetic Fields.
So, have you... I mean, again, this couldn't be a better time, because the new Magnetic Fields, there's new Magnetic Fields music out, and it's good. So this is excellent timing. I look forward to this. I know a little bit more of Guided by Voices than I thought I did, and I am excited There are certain things in the catalog that I do know and love that I'm excited to talk about, but nowhere near the depth that you gave me. So I still have a lot of work to do, but I think we're in for some good shit next week.
Yeah, I think you're going to find a lot more to love.
I'm a thigh man. Take me to Pie Land. That's next week.
That's next week.